This is the new T7 World Raid, bathing in a Spanish sunset, and this is me riding it. Over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to explain everything I learned from 300 kilometers of dirt road, tarmac, and off-piste. Welcome to our T7 World Raid review. If you're new here, welcome to Brake Magazine. I specialize in anything adventure, learning to ride better and having a fun time on a motorbike. When Yamaha first announced the World Raid, I was a little disappointed. See, the concept of an adventure version of a bike is an interesting one because making a bike taller and heavier at the same time means you have to get a lot right to keep it handling well. And for adventure, I think that's pretty important. 2 days ago, we sat in a press conference with Yamaha in a very Spanish hotel. It was very nice, and it really intrigued me. Their presentation and the way they're thinking about this bike and what they're trying to pitch, this is almost Tenere round 2 rather than we're just making a big adventure bike with lots of fuel. And a lot of the changes they've made as a result, I think, are very considered. The World Raid starts with more fuel, 23 litres to be precise. It's split over 2 fuel tanks that come lower on the sides of the bikes, lower centre of gravity, more bike protection. Those are all good things. It's a bit finicky with 2 fuel caps, an external fuel pump, and a pressure-fed link pipe between the two. The suspension is also heavily updated. It's a new spec front and rear and 20 millimeters taller. This should help with performance and weight management. Yamaha has updated the screens/clocks to a new TFT display. The tech is all the same, bar new switchgear and a third ABS mode. That's the headline changes, and they bring with it some other bits. The seat is completely new, as is the screen and the wind protection, and are the foot pegs. It's now 20 millimeters taller than before, weighs 220 kilos wet, and is more monies. That's enough specs. I think it's time to go riding. Isn't it beautiful? That's a man with a rifle. That 23-litre tank, the first thing you notice is that it juts out quite a lot more. One of the nice things is that the way it drops down and out together seem to give you a bit more wind protection on your lower body. That's pretty nice. First off-road section, Mossy's talking to his camera. So turning the ABS off is a pretty interesting system. The little scrolly wheel on the right-hand side to control the menu. They've got rid of the dash button now. So the scrolly wheel pushes in and out. It's a bit finicky. You kind of have to jam your thumb against the top to not accidentally scroll like that, which is irritating. Even the finish on this button is kind of a bit janky, but I think that would annoy me. So click once, click and hold. ABS off. Oh, we've got a race. I don't know what we're racing for.
Maybe someday when I've grown older.
The World Raid is a bit of a split thing. It's a super enjoyable bike to ride. It's still a T7 after all, but it is an adventure model. It's designed to have a little bit more legs, be able to go a bit further, and that comes with some inevitable consequences. Underneath, everything is the same bike. It rides almost identically and comes with the things that made us love the T7 the first time round. The engine is utterly superb for adventure riding. Any gear, anytime, it's great at low RPM, and it makes a really confidence-inspiring bike to just get on and ride and do things that are maybe on the edge of your comfort zone for a bike this big, because it looks after you. That puts a smile on my face at least. Really enjoy riding. It's a little bit dusty. This is a lovely trail to start off on. Look at it, beautiful winding farm track. The standard T7 has a little bit of a, holy, that's a complete whiteout. Has a little bit of that blip off the bottom, and that seems to have gone away. I don't know if enough people mentioned it and complained about it that they got rid of it, but it seems to have gone away, which is, well, it's a nice thing. We'll find out when we do some more tricky enduro and when we ride through a few more towns, but it's still got all the things that make a T7 super fun to ride. It's just a kind of sweeping right-hander, left-hander. It's a bit slippery. No, not as tight as...
You made it.
Yeah.
I was like, ooh.
I only did that because you told me to go.
Looking back on it all.
do notice that there's extra weight there. It's not like they've managed to completely hide it, but it works really well. And at this kind of speed, this kind of cruisy adventure bike riding speed, is very nice. It'll be interesting later in the day to see how it copes with kind of more technical terrain. You can feel that weight gain, however. It's gone up a fair few kilos, and it's not huge, but it definitely changes the bike. Now, clearly you can still do pole Tares things on it if you're pole Tares, but comparatively to the standard T7, it's marginally more cumbersome. You feel it changing direction, you feel it on downhills, but the weight balance of the bike feels a bit more neutral. One of the other things that is an interesting decision is that as they've kind of pitched this as more of a travel bike, that they stuck with the standard Pirelli Scorpion tyres as the base model tyre. And it's a tyre I actually really like. I think it's really good off-road. On-road, sorry. I think it's really good on-road. Off-road, it makes me nervous. It lacks enough side grip. So as soon as you pitch in, especially on these kind of desert roads, these dirt roads, as soon as you lean into a corner, like this position, it just feels kind of loose. It's got a really unplanted feel. It's fine if you're just cruising, but it kind of just runs out of grip, and when it runs out of grip, to me it feels a little bit inconsistent. It's not my favorite feeling in the world.
My time is running out in the set.
The second part of the World Raid Edition is what I would call progress, changes that Yamaha have made that have elevated the bike, that have moved it in a really good direction. The primary one of those is the suspension. Without question, the suspension is better. It is difficult to say without riding it back to back with a stock T7, but I would put this in the category of a lot better to significantly better than the performance of the stock bike.
What lovely adventure trails these are. For me, the first and the most interesting change that the new type of suspension has over the old one is the sensitivity to the ground is a little bit better. I'm not really sure what the mechanism for it is, but it's just a bit more connected to the ground. And because it's a bit more connected to the ground, you've got a tiny bit better feel of the tyres and what it's doing, and it doesn't kind of wish-wash around so much. It gives me a bit more confidence to kind of deal with difficult situations. If you come across a pile of rocks, it's not suddenly like you're on a washboard and it's floating around as much, which just stock bike, the old one, definitely has a little bit of. It's a bit more confidence inspiring, a little bit more playful, a little bit more enjoyable, but the basic kind of riding of it is very nice. On top of that, I think it's got an interesting balance of comfort versus performance that the old bike maybe didn't quite have. That little bit of extra travel has allowed them to have quite a plush first section to the travel, so it's comfortable. It's not Africa Twin, super plush, incredibly soft kind of situation, but it's got a little bit of plushness to it, so it's not harsh and jittery, but it isn't so plush that then you end up with a situation where the ground is completely vague. Interestingly, there's a few times on the road where it does feel a bit vague, on like the bumpier roads where it moves around a bit. It has a bit of a vague feeling, but generally it's a very nice setting.
The other thing that the stock bike is not particularly good at is crashing through the stroke. It doesn't like to hold up in the stroke that well, so if you hit a bump you didn't see, it will bottom out quickly. It's quite metal to metal feeling, not particularly nice, and it never does anything weird when it does that. It's just not great. This bike is much better at that. The damping ramps up quite a lot. It has a much more control at both ends. I think that more controlled action is a nice balance of comfort versus performance too. It's made the bike more predictable at low speed, to those sudden changes in balance that happen, a little bit more predictable, a little bit more comforting to ride, but it's also comfy enough on the bumpy dirt roads to get you through without shaking you to bits. The other upside is it feels more balanced to ride than the stock bike. It feels like if you change things, it doesn't fundamentally affect the bike as a whole. If you put a bag on the back with 15 kilos in it, it's not going to ruin the handling of the bike. It's got a much wider area of operation. I would say it feels right. That's not a very precise description. It's kind of hard to quantify in words. It just feels a more capable, more open suspension package than the stock bike. I think most people that buy this bike will be a couple of clickers away from being happy rather than wanting a revalve or new suspension entirely. It's big steps. The tricky bit here is that Yamaha have made some great progression, but they've done it on the bike designed for traveling further.
Anyone that's watched a few Brake Magazine videos over time will know that I love a sandy riverbed. Literally one of my favorite surfaces to ride. Block pass! I think where you would still get to the point with this of upgrading suspension, if you are in that direction, is if you want it to feel a lot more lively. You want it to kind of hold up in the stroke a bit better. It's still quite plush and kind of using a lot of the travel a lot of the time. And so the kind of hop and pop that you can get with a different setup, a different internal setup, that kind of hop and pop that you can get, sorry, I was messing around there, you probably have to work a little bit for with this. You probably want to add a bit more preload in, stiffen the compression up a little bit, and see if you can find it without ruining the lovely characteristic that it's got as an adventure bike. I think it's achievable. This suspension is a little bit more responsive than the stock Tenere 700s as well to the clicker settings. We've made a few small changes already, and they're positive, and it reacts and it works, and it's just generally an improvement, really.
The TFT Display is probably the most significant detail-based upgrade on this bike, but it's not a TFT display in the way a lot of other manufacturers have done it. Yamaha have tried to stay true to what the T7 was originally, of being kind of a bit more stripped back and simple. And the TFT, what it's really giving you is a clearer screen, a couple of menu options, and the ability to choose 3 ABS modes. So they have the normal ABS, both wheels, ABS front and rear off, or no ABS at all. The menus are nice. You get some options on what your display looks like, including a third option where you can basically turn it into a rally display. So you have 2 trip meters that you can choose from, and you can incrementally adjust them. That's a very nice feature if it's something that you're into. I would hazard that most people are probably not going to use that. The one thing with technology that always irritates me is when there is some friction involved. The switches have been redesigned, and the TFT is controlled by a small thumb wheel on the right hand side. I like the idea, but the execution, it's a bit junky. The wheel part is a bit free between the notches, which means it's very easy to over scroll. Confirmation of menu options is done by pushing the wheel, and that also often turns the wheel, cancelling whatever you were trying to do.
So obviously we're not charging like we're racing a rally here, but we're not hanging about, and the ABS is coping admirably. Do notice that when you do accidentally trigger it, it just isn't progressive like it is on some of the bikes with the Bosch IMU system, but it's super nice having the option to turn it off and just have that on the front. I think a lot of people, myself included, are going to enjoy that. Make it a little bit easier. It's maybe a tiny bit upright for me at my kind of height. What a wonderful place. My God, today has been full of tremendous riding. Nice trails, not difficult, but nice trails, and lots of lovely views. I wish they'd invent a way for to blow the dust out of the way, and that'd be fantastic.
Unsurprisingly, on the road, this is essentially the same base bike, and much like off-road, it feels like that. It's a great road bike. It's very enjoyable to ride. For me, it's a sprightly, effortless road ride that handles smoothly and predictably, especially for a bike with 21-inch front wheel and long travel. If you want in-depth ideas of that underlying performance, our previous review will give you plenty of insight. In a lot of ways, I think the World Raid stacks up to being a marginally better street bike than the base model. I think that most of that is down to the mild amount more control the suspension has. On the road, the suspension strikes a really nice balance between being compliant and not feeling like a spaceship. If you take something like an Africa Twin, it's very soft, very plush, very comfortable, but you lose a little bit of feeling in the road and so on. And the T7 has way less of that. It's still comfortable, but it still has control, it still has feeling. When you brake hard on the road, it dives, but it does it in a controlled way and it settles into the stroke, and when you let off the brakes, it doesn't unbounce, it doesn't wallow through corners, but it's got enough compliance that when the ground is choppy or you get those small holes on back roads, it doesn't upset the bike. It's a very middle of the road, average suspension setup, done well, and that makes it a very good adventure bike because it's going to work for a really wide range of scenarios without being too hyper-focused. I'm not the most experienced road rider in the world. I'm comfortable, but I'm not a superbike rider. And on a personal level, the chassis and the suspension gives me a lot of confidence. It's still a T7, so it doesn't have wild amounts of power through the mid-range. It's not going to pull your arms off, but it's a nice all-round engine package. If you do want to push on, you want to go a little bit more sports bike-like with it, it does need to rev out a little bit. You do need to ride it a bit higher in the revs and work it a bit harder, but otherwise it works very well. The last big question is in the seat height. At 20 mil taller, it is a taller bike. Now Yamaha have tried to mitigate that somewhat by making some smart changes. The suspension being more controlled, I think really helps with the feeling of a bike being tall and top heavy. If the suspension doesn't oscillate as much, you don't have to deal with the changes in balance. It doesn't feel as tall. They've also made the middle of the seat a little bit narrower. This is not a super narrow seat, but that kind of drops it down a little bit and gives you, I would say, the feeling of it only being about 10 mil higher than a stock bike. It's still a T7 and it still does all the things a T7 does very, very well, but there's enough of a difference that it should be a considered thing if you're looking at buying this. I think it's a better touring and travel bike now than it was. If you asked me what I would take if I was going to go and repeat our Iceland film, say, on a bike, and it was this or a T7, I would take this version. In those environments where the wind protection and the fuel range and the solidarity of a tiny bit more weight are good things, this is a much better bike. I would very much enjoy to ride this for a very long time. I enjoyed it. We rode for a long time yesterday, a lot of hours. Very good. Very enjoyable. The downside is it has lost a bit of playfulness. It's not as poppy and hoppy, and the weight balance being a bit more forward makes it a little bit harder to get the front wheel up, especially when those tanks were full in the morning. You have to work a bit harder for it. It's a different type of bike for a different thing, and I think that should be a consideration when you're looking to buy one of these. If you've enjoyed this video and you like Brake Magazine, you want to watch more of these, we do bike reviews, we do how-tos, we have a Patreon page with a great community, and we have a web shop where you can buy some great little bits for your adventures. Otherwise, thanks very much for watching. See you in the next one.